Whether you're a lifter looking to run, a runner looking to lift, or a complete beginner to hybrid training, this video is going to give you a comprehensive insight in how to effectively design your first hybrid training program. Before we begin, make sure you hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell so you can stay in tune for any of my upcoming hybrid training content in future. Let's get started. Hybrid training is revolutionizing the online fitness landscape, and it is transforming the way we think about and approach our training for good reason. It's an approach that combines the best of both worlds, both strength and endurance. And whilst we've always had the option to do both, a lot of people have tended to specialize in bodybuilding or powerlifting or just being a runner. But with great coaches out there and a lot more education, we're becoming more informed and equipped to build training programs that allow us to become leaner, stronger, and more endurable. However, as with any other training program, it's easy to overcook or undercook yourself with a hybrid training program. So whilst I covered this in the last video, let's talk a little bit about what hybrid training actually is. Hybrid training is not only the combination of both strength and endurance training, it is seeking to improve your performance in both strength and endurance, even though these are physical attributes that can counteract each other when not programmed correctly. So in a hybrid training program, you're not just solely lifting weights and you're not just running or cycling. You're balancing your program so you can build muscle, strength, power, and endurance. Hybrid training also offers us a lot of variety with our training program, which can help to make it more sustainable over time. And sustainability with your training is one of the primary things that you should be looking for. So let's talk a little bit about the science behind hybrid training. When you engage in a hybrid training program, your body is going to go through numerous physiological adaptations over time. With hybrid training targeting multiple fitness attributes, otherwise known as fitness qualities, such as strength, power, endurance, and body composition, we can expect to see a lot of changes in our nervous system, musculoskeletal system, cardiovascular and respiratory system, as well as placing varying demands on our energy systems. Our nervous system undergoes changes in neuromuscular coordination, maximal force production, rate of force production, and overall motor control. We can expect to see changes in muscle mass, as well as training different muscle fiber types and increasing our bone mineral density. Finally, hybrid training engages multiple energy systems within the body. Starting with the ATP-PC system, this energy system provides the energy for short, powerful movements lasting up to 10 seconds. It's crucial for exercise like maximal sprints, maximal jumps, or heavy lifts. Training this system increases our power output and explosive strength. Secondly, we have the anaerobic system. This system kicks in for efforts longer than 10 seconds to around 2 minutes. This system doesn't require oxygen and it utilizes a lot of carbohydrates to fuel high intensity efforts like interval training or lifting weights for multiple repetitions. Developing this system allows you to perform at higher intensities for longer durations. Finally, the aerobic system. This system is the primary energy source for efforts lasting longer than 2 to 3 minutes. It relies on oxygen to produce energy, and depending on the exercise intensity, it may heavily rely on carbohydrate, or when performed at lower to moderate intensities, our aerobic system is very good as oxidizing fat as a fuel source. In particular, like when we are doing longer bouts of running or cycling. Improving this system will improve your overall endurance and recovery capabilities. As we can see, there is a lot to gain through hybrid training. However, we do need to consider a few things when it comes to training program design. Ideally, any effective training program is going to maximize performance while reducing the risk of injury. So when it comes to designing your hybrid training program, balance is key. You want to make sure that you're giving adequate stimulus to both strength and endurance components without overtraining / under recovering. And to explain this, we can use the SRA curve. The stimulus recovery and adaptation curve is a fundamental concept in exercise science that explains how our body responds to training. The stimulus is the training session itself. This challenges your body and creates a need for adaptation. After the stimulus, your body needs time to recover. During this phase, it repairs damaged tissues and replenishes energy stores. During the adaptation phase, when your body is given adequate recovery time, your body will adapt to the stimulus by becoming stronger or more efficient so it can handle future challenges. In hybrid training, managing the SRA curve is crucial for maximizing performance and reducing injury risk. Strength training typically requires longer bouts of recovery than endurance, and higher intensity endurance work will typically require more recovery than lower to moderate intensity endurance work. The main thing that we need to take away from the SRA curve is that we need to provide adequate stimulus, give ourselves an adequate amount of recovery so we can receive the adaptations that we're looking for. Another key element I want to dive into is the interference effect. This was a previous school of thought that argued against the ability to train both strength and endurance. However, the interference effect really just speaks to poor program management. Of course, if you run 21 Ks before a strength session, your performance is not going to be as good. Or if you go to run 21 kilometers after obliterating yourself with hypertrophy training, you're going to be quite fatigued. To minimize the interference effect, we need to allow enough time between our strength and endurance training. If applicable, separate our strength and endurance training sessions. If we're training on the same day, perform our strength training prior to our endurance training. And on a side note, just make sure you're adequately fueling and refueling, especially when you're training 2 or more times in a day. Finally, one last point to touch on that pretty much extends off the last concept is consolidating your training stimuli or your training sessions. For example, if you're trying to train at high intensity all across the week, your nervous system and musculoskeletal system is going to become super fatigued and your training performance is going to suffer as a result. You may also put yourself at a higher risk of injury. So when it comes to combining both strength and endurance training, you need to consider having some lower intensity options in there as well. This just might mean having some lower to moderate intensity runs instead of just doing high intensity interval training. It also might mean toning back some of the weights that you would usually lift in the gym, especially when you're coming off the back end of a high intensity interval training session. By optimizing some of the concepts that we have just spoken about, you can optimize your hybrid training program so you can see better results and hopefully not injure yourself. So how do we tie all of the above together? Well, it comes down to organizing your training based off 4 main factors: the type of training, the volume of training, the intensity of training, and the frequency of our training sessions. Now, before we dive into the nuts and bolts of a hybrid training program, let's first consider you as an individual. What are your goals? What is your lifestyle like? What's your training experience like? Do you have any past or current injuries? All of these factors will play a major role in your ability to stick to a program. If you can't stick to a program, it's not going to work. So before coming up with the optimal program, you need to consider A, what is realistic? Can you fit this into your schedule? Does this training program suit your lifestyle? And can it be done frequently over time? And are you physically, emotionally, and psychologically prepared to stick to the program? Is it B, enjoyable? Will you genuinely enjoy this program and the challenges that it provides you with? Or will you dread it and throw in the towel a few weeks in? And C, is this program flexible? Can you pivot when life gets in the way? Or is your training program so rigid that it breaks down every time something happens at work or in your personal life? Or on the other hand, does it negatively impact either of those? Okay, so now that we've discussed some of the things that people often overlook, let's dive into the nuts and bolts of the program. So when it comes to the types of training that we'll be doing, generally we're going to be looking at maximal strength training, hypertrophy training, maybe some plyometrics, and our endurance training sessions. For this instance, I'm just going to be talking about running. So when it comes to the type of running that we'll be doing, this might be an easy or recovery run, some base runs or longer runs. If you've got an event coming up, it might be some tempo work. And then we get into the nastier stuff like your threshold training and your high intensity interval training. This isn't an exhaustive list for running, it's just some of the options out there. When it comes to the total volume of training, with respect to our strength training, this speaks to the amount of sets, reps, and the load that we're lifting. Whereas when it comes to our running, we're looking at the distance or time that we're running for. For the intensity of training, this is the amount of effort we have to exert. For our strength training, with my clients and myself, I like to use RPE, which is rating of perceived exertion, which we can use on a scale of 1 to 10. Or the inverse of that would be using RIR, which stands for reps in reserve. How many reps left in the tank at the end of the set. When it comes to running, there are a few ways to measure intensity. We can also use RPE. It is very popular to use heart rate zones. And honestly, I think that's a good starting point for most beginners. However, as people start to advance, they might want to look more into their actual maximum heart rate or their lactate threshold. So the frequency of training is basically how we organize the type of training we're doing, the volume, and the intensity. How many sessions are we doing across a week? How much volume is in each session? And at what intensities are we working at? So how I'm going to discuss this in this video is giving you 3 examples of the type of person that might be looking to pursue hybrid training. The first person is the beginner or someone that is just getting back into strength training and running. The second is someone with experience lifting who wants to bring running into their training program. And the third person is an individual with running experience who wants to integrate more strength training into their program. So initially, as a beginner or someone who's just getting back into training, you're probably not going to need your training volume to be super high. Your body is going to be quite responsive to the stimulus that it receives, and you may not actually be ready to handle the training volume as someone with more experience would. For strength training, dependent on the intention of the exercise, your rep range might be anywhere from 5 to 15 or more reps, depending on what the exercise is. You might only need 2 to 3 sets. However, the guidelines that I will give you for intensity are relative to you. So that would be the same guidelines that I gave to someone who was more advanced. The only issue here on the strength training side of things is it is actually quite uncomfortable to take a muscle relatively close to failure, which is what we need to do to build muscle and strength. As well as the fact that you might need to actually build some skill and coordination on certain exercises, you may not always fall in the bandwidth or the recommendations for intensity guidelines for strength training. When it comes to the volume of running that you're doing, you might find it quite hard to do some of the longer training sessions that are recommended. So whilst the duration or distance of your sessions start lower, you've always got the ability to build it up over time. And remember, you're going to be highly responsive to the stimulus that you're receiving from your training. Overall, you're probably going to be training a little less frequently than someone who is more advanced. For a beginner, I would recommend starting with 4 training sessions in a week, 2 strength training sessions and 2 runs. Here is an example of what that might look like. On Monday, you've got a full body strength / hypertrophy session. Tuesday, you've got a lower to moderate intensity run. Wednesday, you've got a rest or some active recovery, maybe some mobility. Thursday, you've got your full body strength and hypertrophy session again. Rest Friday. And when you've got a bit more time for it, on Saturday or Sunday, you might go for a longer run. In future videos, I'm going to take a deeper dive into what each training session might look like. So we'll talk about how to build out a strength training session or an endurance training session. However, I've already packed quite a bit into this video. So we're going to move on to the person that is a lifter looking to integrate some running into their training program. As a novice to intermediate lifter, you've probably got a fair bit of training experience in the gym. You also might be someone who's training 5 to 6 days a week. So firstly, let's talk about the frequency of your training. If you're training super intensely 5 to 6 days a week, and you try to throw another 3 or 4 runs in there, you're going to be absolutely smashed. So if you did not want to reduce your training frequency in the gym, I would only be looking to add 1 or 2 runs. However, my actual recommendation would be to drop down to maybe 3 or 4 strength training sessions and possibly look at doing 2 runs. You might be looking to do 3 to 4 sets on some of your strength training exercises. If you've got a bit more experience with your maximal strength training, that 1 to 5 rep range is all yours. For your hypertrophy, generally I program for anywhere between 5 to 15 reps. Remembering that we're going to be increasing your total training volume, so we don't want to increase it too high in your strength training. For your intensity, I would give you the same sort of recommendations I would give to a beginner, in the sense that I'd be using RPE or RIR as a scale. On some of your isolation or machine exercises, you might be working between 1 to 3 reps in reserve. And on some of your heavier compound movements, you might leave a little bit more in the tank, maybe 2 to 4 reps left in the tank. Remember, this is just a general guideline though. So I've actually provided 2 samples of what it's going to look like for a lifter. Lifter A might want to look at doing 3 strength training sessions and 2 runs. And lifter B might want to look at doing 4 strength training sessions and 2 runs. Lifter A would be looking at doing a full body training split. And lifter B would be looking at doing 2 upper body and 2 lower body sessions. Again, we'd be looking at doing the longer runs, generally on the weekends when you got a bit more time on your hands. And that shorter, lower to moderate intensity run, you might stick midweek. So finally, we're going to talk about the runner who wants to integrate some strength training into their program. You might be someone that is running 3 to 4 times a week, maybe more. However, if you're a bit of a noob when it comes to strength training, please understand, initially, you might see the strength training impact your running performance. I should say this for the lifter as well. You're introducing a new training stress. That's going to mask your level of fitness to higher amounts of fatigue. But remember, this is the long game. Over time, you may want to enter an event where you might have a taper or the chance to deload, reduce fatigue, and see where your fitness is really at. For the runner, I've kind of done the opposite of what I would for the lifter. Let's say that you're running 4 times a week. You might have option A, where you've got 2 strength training sessions and 4 runs. Or you might have option B, where you've got 2 strength training sessions and 3 runs. Remember, these are just guidelines. What I've taken into account when designing the programs for the lifter and the beginner is planning the training throughout the week so you can maximize the performance in each session, as well as trying to reduce injury risk factors due to coming into sessions with a lot of muscle damage or high amounts of fatigue. There's many ways to skin a cat when it comes to hybrid training, but those really are the key factors that you should be considering. And as you can see, there are a few different approaches that you can take. Now finally, let's talk about some common mistakes that people make with hybrid training and how to avoid them. Overtraining / under-recovering. It's easy to commit to doing too much when you're excited about a new program. However, hybrid training does not mean that you slap a bodybuilding, powerlifting, and marathon program together and just hope for the best. Instead, we need to understand how each session affects the other, remembering that we're going to be carrying more fatigue, and this may impact performance in one session or another. So what you'll want to do is find the minimum effective dose for training for each session and consider alternating your training load, meaning the volume, intensity, and frequency of training that you're doing with respect to the type of training that you're doing over time based on what your goals are and which physical attributes you want to see improvements in. To extend on this point, just because you see a hybrid athlete on Instagram or on YouTube training twice a day, 5 days a week, doesn't mean that you will be able to handle that amount of training. They could be someone that is purely just filming YouTube videos for a living, and they can train as much as they want and they get so much time to rest and recover. Or they could be an ex-athlete in another sport and they've built up a higher tolerance to the amount of training volume and stimulus that they can handle. So avoid comparing yourself to others when it comes to a hybrid training approach, and be realistic with what you can handle at this point. Finally, another big point that I want to focus on, because social media is such a big thing and we want to be posting our PBs, don't sacrifice technique for a new PB in the gym or on your runs. And don't try a PB every single week. Sure, if you're new to this, you're gonna see a lot of progress quite quickly. But if you start beating yourself up because you're putting in the effort, but you're constantly fatigued, and you're getting injured all the time, this is a good sign that you might be pushing things a little too hard, sacrificing technique in the gym and on your runs. This is not productive in the long run. Finally, I want to touch on a super important point that I will not be discussing today, but I'll be discussing in next week's video. Your nutrition. Hybrid training places a lot of demands on the body. This means a lot more tissue repair, which we are going to need protein for, fueling exercise at higher intensities, which we'll need carbohydrates for, as well as high amounts of sweat loss on your runs, which you need to make sure that you're hydrated for, and you need to meet your body's requirements for fats and micronutrients as well. Proper nutrition is crucial for your performance and recovery with a hybrid training approach, and any other training approach for that matter. I hope you took away a lot of value on this week's video on combining strength and endurance training together, and that you understand that you need to be quite diligent when it comes to having a hybrid training approach. It is a potent tool for building a leaner, stronger, and more endurable body. However, your program design is a fundamental key to doing this effectively and safely. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more hybrid training content in future. Finally, leave a comment below if you've got any more questions or you would like me to cover another topic in future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we're going to be talking about nutrition for strength, endurance, and body composition. Peace.